Su Shirzi tossed some bait into the water, grew tired of the sight of the koi fish splashing about, and clapped his hands as he stood up. Jiang Ni had already prepared a brocade for him to wipe his hands with warm water, but Su Fengnian did not accept it. 3 years of tempering had made it difficult for him to adjust from luxury to frugality, but transitioning from frugality back to luxury also required a gradual process. He left the Ting Chao pavilion alone and didn't forget to turn around and remind, "Your sister Jiang and I, don't even think about sneaking into the building and trying to make off with a secret martial arts scripture. You know, none of the custodians in there are something you can handle with a shinfu hidden in your sleeve. These old guys are far from being as tender and caring as I am. It's much better for a girl to add fragrance to the books with her red sleeves and grind the ink with her delicate hands. I'm leaving, stop staring at me. From the first glance I saw you, I knew Sister Jiang Ni's eyes were beautiful." After teasing the maid, Su Fengnian walked towards the stable that belonged only to him and his second sister. Along the way, whenever he saw a pretty maid, he couldn't help but reach out to hug their waists, touch their hands, and for those with more outstanding looks, he naturally wouldn't forget to rub their full chests, call them sisters, and flirtatiously say, "E.O., there's more flesh here, don't get tired walking," which caused a series of silver bell-like shy and embarrassed laughter. Su Fengnian arrived at the stable, which was even more magnificent than an ordinary wealthy family's residence, and for the time being, there was only a lonely red lame horse inside. The servant, old Huang, who had been a horse groom for the princely mansion for many years, was chatting with the horse. Seeing the crown prince who had been inseparable for 3 years, he habitually grinned and revealed a comical scene without 2 front teeth. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said in surprise, Old Huang, where is your box? Why aren't you carrying it on your back?" Old Huang is probably from Shu, and he can't get rid of the West Shu accent that is very unpopular in the dynasty. And the small West Shu, with no more than 60,000 soldiers, also couldn't escape the fate of being annihilated by the king of Bailing, just like the Western Shu dynasty. But Old Huang is much more lovely than Jiang Ni and is very content with his lot. In the past 3 years of bleak and desolate travels, if it weren't for Old Huang's ability to fish, climb trees, steal chickens and dogs, and teach Su Fengnian how to weave straw sandals, this crown prince would have starved to death in a foreign land. The old servant carried a long, red sandalwood box wrapped in tattered cloth on his back, and he would never let Su Fengnian open it to see the mystery inside. At first, Su Fengnian thought it was the famous Xuanji box used to hold divine weapons and sharp tools in the martial world, and he thought his father would at least send a peerless master to accompany him. But when he first encountered bandits and saw that the old servant was even more slippery than he was completely disheartened. Every time he coaxed Old Huang to open the box, the old horse groom would only shake his head and chuckle, and Su Fengnian could only curse, I don't want your wife to undress for me to see." Once in Qinghe County, Su Fengnian couldn't resist his curiosity when Old Huang went to take a dump and secretly studied it, but he couldn't figure it out. He only felt that the box was cold and piercing when he held it, and when Old Huang saw it, his eyes were so resentful that he looked more pitiful than the yellow-skinned girl he teased on the streets of Lingzhou. After that, Su Fengnian caught a cold the next day, and it was Old Huang who made medicine, boiled water, and stole sweet potatoes to roast, making him extremely busy. For half a month, it was the old horse groom who carried Su Fengnian forward, and the most profound impression was the bony frame of Old Huang that made him feel uneasy. Of course, there was also some unspoken gratitude. After that, Su Fengnian never had the idea of stealing the box. But he couldn't help but think of a day in the future when he could know the little secret inside. Of course, it was a trivial little secret, and it would be a joke for an old horse groom to have a big secret. To this day, Su Fengnian still vividly remembers after escaping from the pursuit of bandits, he asked the old servant, Old Huang, are you a master? Old Huang nodded with a shyness that would be touching if it were on a pretty woman's face. Su Fengnian asked again, very high. Old Huang seemed even more shy, fidgeting and turning his head slightly, and then nodded again. Su Fengnian thought of the tragic scene of being chased and beaten by a group of people with wooden spears and firewood knives just now, and he forcibly restrained the idea of hitting people, and asked again, how high? Old Huang blinked his eyes, seemingly thinking, and after a while, he reached out to gesture, seemingly about the same height as the crown prince, and then he lowered the height. So Su Fengnian, who was hoping for a lucky break, was completely desperate. So Su Fengnian had every reason to be resentful towards the great pillar of the country. In addition to forgetting to arrange a master as an attendant, he not only didn't tell him the simple truth of you don't carry a jade when you walk in the martial world, but also encouraged Su Fengnian by saying, "Your son, when you go out, the most important skill is to protect your life. Here, put on this Wukuei treasure armor that is impervious to knives and fire, and put on these gloves made of silk threads vomited by ice silkworms." There are also 3 or 4 peerless scriptures similar to Wudong's Zhenjiao, such as the Shangqing Ziyang Ju. Take them all, they are good stuff. If you lose any one of them in the martial world, it will cause a bloody storm. You can practice them in your spare time, and maybe you will become a master tomorrow. Look, Dad really loves you. Take all the silver tickets, and the few jade pendants on your waist are worth several hundred taels of gold. If you run out of money, you can go to a pawn shop to sell them, and you will have no problem eating and drinking. At first, Su Fengnian thought it was indeed good, and such a journey was a smooth road. He didn't have to worry about spending money like water, flirting with beauties with different styles in various places, getting to know famous heroes with a loud reputation, and being brothers with the famous heroes in the martial world. It was a happy thought. But later, he knew that he was a big fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered, and everyone loved and rushed at him. In the end, the only use of those scriptures was to tear them down and use them to wipe his ass. Only half of the swallowing gold treasure book, which looked like a heavenly book no matter how you looked at it, was finally put to use. On the way back, he met a person with a white fox face that was more beautiful than any of the top courtesans in Lingzhou. He knew the goods and agreed to accept half of the swallowing gold treasure book and escort him back to Lingzhou. For that half year, Su Fengnian finally met a real master with no evil thoughts, and tried every means to please him. However, the white fox face was indifferent to him and deliberately kept a long distance when walking, unless he encountered an unenlightened robber, otherwise he would never talk nonsense. Su Fengnian walked into the stable and took a handful of hay for the lame horse, sighing, Red Rabbit, if my second sister sees a good Han blood treasure horse being tortured like this, it's hard to ensure that she won't give me chestnuts to eat." In these 3 years, a hawk, a horse, and an old servant who was fortunately not blind, were all he had. Su Fengnian fed the horse for a while, thinking that the Secret Service in the mansion had passed on the news that the white fox face was still lingering in the city, so he was ready to go out of the princely mansion to find some long-lost fun. This guy would occasionally stab him with a sentence when he was down and out. If you are son of a noble family, then I am a woman. Su Fengnian had no reason not to show off. Before, he only felt that it was natural to rely on his father's Su character and the great king flag to bully others, and he still thinks so now, but he has a bit more cherish. After all, he has been through more than 2 years of miserable life, and he knows that the world's daily necessities are not cheap. Old Huang and the Crown Prince cultivated a tacit understanding, and seemed to know that he was going out to have fun, so he rubbed his hands and made a gesture of drinking. Su Fengnian understood and laughed. "You don't worry, I won't forget to treat you to the best and most expensive Hua Diao wine, let's go." Su Fengnian had just left the stable with the old horse groom when he saw the old Taoist priest, who could be believed to be an immortal. Without guessing, this old liar must have come to ask himself to persuade his brother to go to Longhu Mountain to learn. 12 years ago, it was Su Fengnian who let the dog bite this Taoist priest. Because his mother believed in Buddhism before she died, the Crown Prince, who didn't believe in the stuff of destiny, was still respectful to monks and nuns, but as soon as he saw the fortune-telling Taoist priests on the street, he would definitely smash the stall, and this Longhu Mountain Taoist priest was also unlucky. The old Taoist priest, who was unkempt and covered in lice, passed the first hurdle and almost lost his virginity, which was not easy to hold on to. The beginning of that encounter was very unpleasant, but the end was still passable. The child Su Fengnian didn't forget to give a long-term lesson to the ancestor of Longhu Mountain when he left. Old man, if you want to deceive people and money, you have to invest in making a decent set of clothes. Those Taoist priests in the Immortals novels are all dressed in yellow crowns and Taoist robes, and they will immediately ascend to the immortal platform after a hiccup. Don't you learn from them? Next time you come to the princely mansion like this, I will still let the dog bite you. It seems that the old Taoist priest with the surname Zhao has learned his lesson and has indeed changed into a brand new and appropriate Taoist robe, with a tall yellow crown on his head, and has also added an old peachwood sword. Wherever he goes, he enjoys the respectful eyes that he did not enjoy in the first half of his life when he traveled the rivers and lakes, which made the old Taoist priest, who was used to the unchanging faces on the mountain for decades, very pleased. Su Fengnian put his arm around the old Taoist priest's shoulder and said in a low and cunning voice, "The old Taoist priest with a cow's nose, it's a good thing for my brother to go to Longhu Mountain, but your Longhu Mountain has formed such a great good fortune with my father, and you don't have any expression? Otherwise, my brother can also learn at Wudong Mountain. Why go out of his way to your desolate place? The scenery of Wudong Mountain is very beautiful, and I can visit it every 3 or 5 times." The old Taoist priest looked embarrassed, looked around and saw that no one was there, so he quietly reached into his arms, took out an old and yellow ancient book, and said reluctantly, "This riding dragon sword manual." Su Fengnian immediately turned his face on the spot, and didn't even look at the sword manual, raised his hand and pointed to the direction of Tingchao Pavilion, and said disdainfully, Damn it, old Taoist priest with a cow's nose, you are too unprofessional. If you want a secret book, whether it's for practicing internal skills or playing with weapons, do I need to go elsewhere? You're not ashamed to show your face." The old Huang, who has been alive for 6 or 70 years, is very insightful and has a lot of understanding. He followed the crown prince and sneered. The old Taoist priest then remembered that there was a martial arts library called Tingchao Pavilion in the princely mansion, and suddenly realized, with an embarrassed face, he put his hand back, feeling embarrassed and said, What should I do then?" Su Fengnian lowered his voice and said, "Are there any pretty young Taoist nuns on Longhu Mountain? It doesn't matter if they are a little older, but don't exceed 35 years old. If they are older, they are old. No matter how well they are maintained, they must have lost the charm and style of Sun Yong's half-old." The old Taoist priest was surprised and said, "Iyaj." Su Fengnian raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's the matter, there aren't any, or are you not willing?" The old Taoist priest seemed to struggle between heaven and man, but in fact, it was just a few blinks of an eye, and he whispered, There are indeed, but they are all the disciples and grandchildren of my fellow apprentices. I have always been very strict in accepting disciples, so that there are very few disciples in my lineage. But, since the Crown Prince has the idea of studying Taoism, I naturally don't mind introducing 1 or 2 younger female disciples." Su Fengnian patted the old Taoist priest on the shoulder and gave a thumbs up, on the road. The old Taoist priest began to recite the Jisanwu Du Gong Lu Ji to atone for his sins, thinking in his heart, "Ancestors, don't blame me, I am doing this for the long-term plan of Longhu Mountain." Then the old Taoist priest, who is honored as one of the 3 great Taoist priests of Longhu Mountain, said anxiously, "Accepting disciples must choose an auspicious time. If we don't leave for Longhu Mountain today, it will be too late, which is also inappropriate for the young master." Su Fengnian frowned and said, Right now." The old Taoist priest, who looked anxious, nodded heavily, Right now." Su Fengnian, who wanted to take his brother hunting in his spare time, took a deep breath and ordered old Huang to wait outside the mansion first, and then took the old Taoist priest, who didn't look like a Taoist priest at all, to find his beloved brother Su Longxiang. After leaving the stable for 100 steps, the old Taoist priest deliberately or inadvertently turned his head to look at the old horse groom, who was standing by the stable and grinning foolishly. His originally heavy steps finally became a bit lighter. Su Fengnian came to his brother's courtyard and found out with both anger and amusement that this kid was squatting on the ground watching ants again. He walked over and patted him on the head, and said directly, Don't look anymore, the ants on Longhu Mountain are bigger, go there to watch, learn your skills early and come down the mountain, bring a bag of wild hawthorn for me, do you hear?" The young master, who was really silly, stood up, nodded heavily, and laughed again. Of course, he couldn't help but drool again. The old Taoist priest was dumbfounded. Was this difficult task solved so easily? The great pillar of the country, who had once turned the whole river and lake upside down, had tried his best to persuade this disciple. Su Fengnian wiped his drool while laughing and scolded, "A silly Huang man. Look, this is your master from now on. When you get to Longhu Mountain, you can hit anyone, but don't hit this old man. If anyone dares to bully you and call you a fool, you should fight to the death. If you can't beat them, let your master write a letter, and I will lead our biling iron cavalry to rush 2,000 miles to kill Longhu Mountain. Remember, don't be bullied. In this world, only our brothers and 2 sisters have the share to bully others." Su Longxiang, who was favored by God and given the power of a dragon elephant, was silly and had not opened his heart, but it did not mean that he had no feelings. On the contrary, in a certain aspect, he was particularly strong, such as his strong dependence on the brother who would wipe his drool for him besides his mother. When he was 14 years old, Su Fengnian committed a great disaster, and the great pillar of the country, who always did not beat or scold his children, almost took an iron whip and smashed it on his most beloved son. No one dared to persuade or stop him, but it was silly Huang Man who stood in front of his brother and did not give an inch. Su Fengnian's eyes turned red, and he turned his head and said to the old Taoist priest word by word, "The old Taoist priest with a cow's nose, I said, don't let anyone bully Huang Man. Although I, Su Fengnian, am a heartless dandy, I have no strength to bind a chicken, but you should understand the consequences." The old Taoist priest gave a silly smile and nodded with a wry smile. The team gradually left, and Su Fengnian and his father, Su Xiao, did not send them out of the city all the way. Su Fengnian found the old servant standing next to the jade lion, and said with a smile, "I'm not in the mood to drink today, later?" The old servant smiled very simply and brilliantly, an old face like the vast reed clusters that can only be seen when you go out to the wilderness, which may not be enchanting or magnificent, but has its own feelings. Like an old jar of wine that has been sealed for many, many years.